Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge. Hi everyone, my name is Katie Crane, the Pilates professional. Welcome to another episode of the Pilates Lounge podcast. This week's episode, I'm going to share some meanderings of the journey of learning as a Pilates professional. At this time of the year, I'm doing two things. I'm spending time with the students that I've just mentored for the last 6 months. And some of them are at the point where they have been shadow teaching with us in the studio. And then we offer to our community what we call community classes, where these students take the classes and we don't charge our community. And the whole point is it's a way for them to prepare for their final prac exams, to really start to showcase themselves and experience what it's going to be like holding the room and holding the floor. And also, we really encourage our clients to give feedback to our students. At the same time as being, I guess, at the end of a learning journey with our current students, I am beginning the learning journey for our new students who have joined us this month, and we kick off with our first face-to-face workshop. This happens every time. Every time there's this merging of the end and the beginning is a great time for reflection, because I'm able to see just how far these graduating students have come in 6 months. And I'm also able to see the pregnant beginnings of this new cohort who are all excited, uncertain, scared, and they just have this pregnant energy of anticipation, but not quite knowing what's going to be happening. Whereas the students who are ready to start teaching, and they are teaching the community classes before they do their prac exams, they have a completely different energy. It is, they have strength and resolution. I can see that they are starting to find their own personality in the Pilates work. And they are starting to create almost their own persona, because when we teach, we do have a teaching persona. And quite often that teaching persona is very different to our private persona. For example, many instructors are actually naturally quite they're naturally introvert, they're naturally hermits, they naturally want to spend a lot of time on their own. But then when they go into the Pilates studio, they are expressive, extroverted, full of energy, and they sit in completely different shoes. I often wonder if it's because we do give so much energy as Pilates professionals that maybe we almost guard that energy, or we need to spend a lot of time on our own so that we can replenish that energy. I'm not quite sure, but I definitely see that in a lot of Pilates professionals. But when it comes to this time of year, it just gets me thinking of the journey of learning as Pilates professionals. When we start out, we are presented with some very specific work. We're presented with the repertoire that we need to learn. We are presented with some basic anatomy and physiology, and quite often learning anatomy and physiology, if you've never been exposed to it, is like learning a new language. So that can be a huge learning curve on its own. And for many people, we are exposed to learning how to communicate with people, learning how to speak publicly, learning how to present ourselves to a group publicly. And all of those things can be very overwhelming. And often new instructors ask me, what is it that I need to learn next? Now, when we become instructors, everything that we learn is fast-tracked. So what we learn for our mentorship, it's a 6-month program, and that's just for reformer and mat. It's mostly reformer, but we do include some mat work in it just because I believe that mat work is the foundation of Pilates movement principles. So it takes our students a minimum of 6 months to get ready or to become ready to step onto a floor and take a class. Just being able to teach the repertoire that they've learnt. Now, for a lot of students, for example, my cohort at the moment, we have 9 students and 4 of them are ready to exam at the end of 6 months. So 6 months may seem like a long time for a lot of people if we're talking about a reformer certificate, but after many, many years of teaching, over a decade of teaching myself, and not much less than that of mentoring, I know what it takes to become proficient at teaching Pilates, so teaching reformer. So some of those students will take 8, 9, 12 months or even longer. Some of them will never complete the course. That is just the way the cookie crumbles. You know, some people will join up with a course. They'll have all good intentions at the beginning, but then something in life gets in their way and they don't get to complete it. But on the whole, I expect that if students put in enough energy, commitment, dedication during the 6 months, then they can complete the certificate and be at the stage of being able to teach confidently in 6 months. So, but even though you are at that point, you've learned enough repertoire or you remember enough repertoire to be able to hold a class, there are always a lot of concepts and a lot of things that we are asking you to understand that you have not grasped yet. And that is absolutely fine. So I always say to our students, for the first 12 months of teaching reformer, just practice teaching what it is that you have learnt. Really nail it. Really get that specific work, that specific repertoire into your body and see that repertoire on many, many different bodies and use that repertoire in many different sequences or different class programs so that you can intuitively start to know what works. And then when you know what works, you can start to put together the why. Now, the difference between Pilates and a lot of other things when it comes to fitness is that we are always asking that question, why? And we are always trying to understand. So Pilates is not just a set of ad hoc exercises. Pilates is all about moving in a way that in every single exercise that you do, the entire body is involved in it. And it's really what sets Pilates, one of the things that sets Pilates apart from other activities is that everything that we do in Pilates is a full body experience. We do not isolate muscles because we don't isolate muscles in the real world. You don't even take a coffee cup off of the shelf and isolate muscles. You know, there's nothing in the world that you do where you're isolating. So what we're trying to do is get people to experience their entire system, their entire body, their mind, and their soul ultimately in the moment. And that's partly why people feel so good when they leave. So when we first become instructors, we understand repertoire. We know repertoire and we can put a class together. That's all you need to be able to do to be a Pilates instructor from the get-go. But the magic starts to happen when you comprehend why it is that you're doing. So in the first 12 months, I always recommend just go and practice what it is that you have learned and practice that work on as many bodies as possible. And then if you look at courses that expand on what it is that you've ever learned or learned so far. So that might be you do a course specifically on pregnancy. So even though you probably touch on pregnancy in your initial certificate, we can delve much deeper. Or you go and do a course that is specifically on a pathology that you have an interest in, or a pathology that you have been seeing a lot of in the studio. So maybe you do a course on knee pathology or lower limb pathology or shoulder pathology or upper body pathology. Maybe you do a course on a specific avatar. So maybe you do a course on menopause, on teenagers, Pilates for runners, Pilates for equestrian, that type of thing. So what happens is you start to dive deeper into the work that you've already learned, and you start to expand the repertoire of what you already know. So the information that you learn in your next course is not brand new. It's an addition to what it is that you're already doing. What happens when you go and do another course is, say you spend 2 hours doing a course, or maybe you do a course for 4 hours or a weekend. I can guarantee you only ever walk away remembering a couple of exercises, or maybe, a couple of concepts, or, a few. Like, you don't remember everything, and that's absolutely fine. What I recommend doing once you've done a course is whatever it is that really sticks with you, whatever it is that really resonated with you, go back to the studio that you're working at and just use that over and over and over again until that becomes second nature to you, until that becomes part of your existing repertoire, your existing understanding that you've already got. So every time you go and do a workshop, you come away with just a piece of the pie. You want to just add that pie to your toolbox, and then eventually you'll have this beautiful recipe book. You're not expected to understand everything, because when you go and do the next workshop, quite often things that you learn either in the last workshop or in your initial teacher training, you'll have a couple of light bulb moments. There'll be some similarities. There'll be definitely some differences, but many of the concepts that we try and teach people in further education, the foundation is exactly what you've learned in your initial certificate. So we're building on the foundation, and it's not a building that goes straight up. The foundation is almost a nucleus, and then the growth ends up being omnidirectional. So, when you're learning, you'll learn a little bit over here, a little bit over there, and then on the next learning, those two vines intertwine. And then you'll continue learning. And so the learning continues to be going in all directions, but from the core of where you started. Over the years, I will be very, very surprised if at some stage you don't turn away from mechanical learning. So mechanical learning is learning repertoire, knowing how many reps to do, knowing spring settings, knowing what body parts you're meant to be feeling or meant to be focusing on. So the mechanical is breaking stuff down, right? And what happens is we have a left and a right brain. This is how we perceive the world. So our left brain loves the mechanics of things. Our left brain loves to break things down and to categorize them or catalog them. The problem with that is if we don't step back, and if we keep cataloging and we keep categorizing, and say we do a workshop on the elbow, and then we do a workshop on the shoulder, and then we do a workshop on the hip, and then we do a workshop on the knee. But if down the line, down the years and years of your teaching, if you don't end up doing some kind of workshop that brings all of that together, where you get to step back away from that intense focus, then you'll never really understand the Pilates work the way that it was intended. So remember, Pilates is intended to be a whole body, mind, and spirit experience. So if we keep breaking stuff down, if we keep honing in, using a microscope to try and understand things more and more and more, then we lose the bigger picture. Now, this is the practice of the left brain. So the left brain loves strategy, structure, cataloging, the nitty-gritty, looking at things under the microscope, wants to know the finer details. And the left brain is always trying to keep you focused on exactly that. The left brain never wants you to stand back and see the bigger picture. And it's a fascinating study when you understand how our brain works. So the left hemisphere kind of specializes in a sort of piecemeal attention, and that helps us to make use of the world. But in doing so, it alters our relationship with it. So equally, the right hemisphere subserves a broad, open attention that enables us to see ourselves connected to, and in the human case, to empathize with whatever is other than ourselves. So when we step back, when we step away from the attention to detail, then we can see the world as separate from ourselves, as something we can use, but we can also see ourselves connected more deeply to the world and to our community and to our experiences that we have. So, in other words, we can see others for the first time as beings just like ourselves. And ultimately, this is the ground of empathy. Now, you will probably experience over your years of practice and over your years of teaching that you start to ask some bigger questions. So once you've gone forwards, you've looked at all of the detail, you've looked at all of the mechanics of things, of how the bones and the joints and the ligaments and the muscles, how they all function in different parts of the body. Over the course of your teaching career, I have no doubt about it that you will experience, or you will be witness to, some miracles, some things that don't necessarily make sense to you, and some things that don't necessarily are not answered in the detail. Over the years of teaching, I have seen people both suffer relentlessly with injuries, or injuries that have become chronic, or injuries that have taken over people's lives when it should not have happened. So, when we look at what the injury is, it has not made sense. Why have they succumbed to that experience in such a negative way? But then you'll also experience, and you will bear witness to, people overcoming what is medically termed as chronic or severe or cannot be cured. You will see people overcome that as well. And if we sit in the left brain forever and we never step away from the big picture, or we never step away from the small picture, then we can never truly celebrate those things with other people. We can never empathize with the people, and we can never really start to understand what our role is as a Pilates professional when it comes to this bigger picture. So I think that we all go into Pilates. I mean, a lot of us start out teaching Pilates because we ourselves have such a positive experience with it, and then we just want to share it with the world. I'm going to assume that most of us start because we've had a positive physical experience. I don't think that many of us would begin our journey having a positive ethereal experience with Pilates, but I do wonder, and I do hope for everybody who becomes a Pilates practitioner, professional, I wish for everybody to end up having ethereal experience. And what I mean by that is I hope that you are open to seeing the wonders of what it is that can happen in somebody's life, in somebody's relationships, in somebody's perception of the world, in somebody's environmental awareness or environmental experience, just by doing Pilates. Now, why does that happen? How is it that somebody comes to Pilates, they're going to get on a reformer, they're going to do the footwork, feet in straps, hands in straps. It's all pretty cut and dry. But then over the time of you practicing, and I hope that this does happen to you, you start to recognize the expansive wonder, the expansive nature, the expansive possibilities of what it is that we're actually doing. As it happens, I don't necessarily have an answer for you, but I certainly have some ideas. Over the years of your teaching, if you do all those things, right, you do your repertoire, focus in on all the different parts of the body or the different types of people and all that sort of stuff, and then you will start to ask some bigger questions of maybe why is it working? Because the mechanics doesn't always add up. There can be 6 people with exactly the same spinal injury, and there can be 6 completely different physical experiences. Somebody could be in pain, somebody could not be in pain, somebody could be able to move in one direction but not the other, somebody could be able to move multi-directionally. So when we use, for example, evidence-based literature to tell us what it is that we should and shouldn't be doing, that doesn't work for everyone. And so we have to question that. Why is that it doesn't work for everyone? Well, part of it is that we all have such a unique individual experience in the world, and how our body responds to the world is a direct reflection of that ongoing experience. So if your experience in the world is one of trust and love and support, of self-forgiveness and self-love, then potentially you're going to get over sickness, pain, injury much easier or with greater success than somebody whose experience in the world is full of sorrow, anger, trauma, holding on to rage, and lacking self-worth and self-love. So it becomes very apparent after working with many, many bodies that multiple bodies will end up with a completely different experience from everything that you put into the class. So it doesn't matter what it is that you do in the class, everybody's having their own experience, and we don't have control over that, right? So the left brain wants us to have control, but we don't have control over that. What we can have is empathy, skills of observation, skills of listening, skills of being open to change, being open to learning from the people in front of us, and not always having to be the person in charge. I think that's taken me years to be able to gain the confidence and the skills to allow for my client to lead the way. They don't know that they're leading the way, but I'm certainly not in there telling them what it is that they need to do, because when they walk in the room, and I can do it in a reformer room as well, you can walk in the room after you've been teaching for long enough and intuitively, without even recognizing that because it is intuitive, it's not an aware knowing, it's an unaware knowing of what it is that you need to do with that class. And that is where all of these little micro courses of, and that's the beauty of the brain, right? So you've got to zoom in, get all of that information you can under the microscope, but then you get to take all of that information and zoom out and then have a look, almost be sitting like the bird's eye view, overseeing the whole class, and then you can cater to everybody. So when we first become instructors, it can feel like the biggest task in the world, and it has been. It's a huge feat to get through a Pilates teacher training course, whether it's mat, reformer, or your full diploma. It's a big commitment, and there's a huge learning curve for all of us. But just know that if you continue on that path of learning, you will start to have the most amazing understanding of human nature in general. I've often recommend a book to people when they ask what I've been reading. Ian McGilchrist is definitely one of the most amazing authors. He wrote a book called the master and his emissary. So the master and his emissary is all about the left and the right brain, but he helps you understand the paradoxes of life. And you may not realize it yet, but as a psychiatrist and a philosopher, he looks at the relationship between the two brains' hemispheres in a brand new light. So it's not just an interesting neurological problem, but as a crucial, kind of shaping factor of our culture. Because if you think about it, our cultures have changed. Our culture has changed immensely. You know, if you think about what the world was like and what life was like for your parents, and then what life was like and what the world was like for your grandparents, and then your great-grandparents, and if you kept taking steps back and back and back. So what has happened, if we really think about it, is there's been this real left brain dominant presence in our culture, you know, so there's greed and lust, and people want, you know, like I kind of grew up assuming that, you know, like making money was one of the most important factors in the world, you know, or, you know, being successful meant, you know, being the CEO of your own company and having kids and being, you know, driving the best car, having the biggest house, having the biggest TV, all of these very altruistic things that we really don't, it's a complete illusion. If you're on that path, I hope that at some stage you realize the illusion. Success maybe is being able to serve other people, being able to serve community, you know, being able to spend time with your family. And with this left brain dominant culture of more, you know, we're going to keep zooming in. We want more bigger houses. We want faster cars. We want everything at our fingertips right now. We've started to lose the bigger picture. And as a result, people are mentally and emotionally distressed more than any time in the history of man. People have more chronic disease and more pain, and up with chronic disease and more pain at a much younger stage of their life than any time in history. Yet we have all of these modern medicine at our fingertips. So how have we ended up in that place where we have absolutely everything because we've strived for everything? Technology is the greatest that it's ever been. You know, they tell us that, you know, modern medicine knows more about the body than it's ever known, yet we are sicker than what we've ever been. Well, what has happened is we've zoomed in too much. If we zoom out, what's missing is community, is building solid and heart-filled relationships, is being in nature, is spending time on our own self-reflecting with absolutely nothing to take our focus away from that. So, I mean, how many people do you see jogging or walking, doing their exercise outside now? Everybody's got their earpods in constantly. So we're constantly being fed information. We're never spending time on our own. And the inner dialogue that we have is actually a really, really massive part of our self-growth. So as Pilates practitioners or professionals, I think that we need to take a big step out to really have a good grasp of the bigger reality of our environment and what it is that people might be lacking so that we can help them. And we need to be living that life ourselves, because we spend all this time telling people what they should be doing. But then we go home, we're on our phone, we're on the computer, we're in front of the TV, all the things. Well, it's actually not fulfilling if you never spend time in introspection or self-reflection. And you're not going to grow either, because that becomes a vortex of energy going in one direction. So one of the best things that we can do, and that's why I recommend to our brand new instructors, you don't need any more information. You've zoomed in on this course, right? You've got your certificate. You've spent that however many months it is, your 6 months. Now is time to just continue to practice that. And at some stage you can zoom out and you can start to see the bigger picture of what it is that you've learned. And then you can zoom in again, learn what it is that you want about whatever subject that really fascinates you, and then utilize that and then make time to zoom out, see the bigger picture. Eventually, and what I was saying before is I see this when I look at people that now I follow. So for example, Gilchrist, another who's a psychiatrist, another person that I definitely recommend following if you are at that point of understanding and learning where you've learned all the things Pilates and now you're looking for something else, then you definitely want to check out Jaap van der Wert. So Jaap van der Wert was an embryologist. So he was one of the most well-known people in the world who studied human beings at conception. But the way that he talks, the way that he explains that your parents don't make you, you become from them or you become within them. And he talks very philosophically about how we become human beings. And over the years, as an expert in the creation of human beings, he has not stuck to, this very mechanical process of limbs and cells and structures. He has gone so much farther than that. He's stepped way back, and now he talks about the soul. Now, my own experience as a Pilates instructor is definitely that over the years, I have become much more spiritual. I don't know when it happened, but I definitely was more drawn to things like meditation, breath work, self-reflection, and maybe it could start with something as simple as journaling, but I definitely started to ask the bigger questions of our cosmic collective connection. And there is no ways that I could just be here as a body with, I remember when I first learnt the body and it was all just muscles and levers and joints and ligaments. Well, Dr. Jaap van der Wert, he actually says that there are not all of those different ligaments because we come from this single circular cell, which then is divided in half. And actually the cell divides in half down the center. And then from there, we start to turn inside out to become the person that we are, but we turn inside out, and it's as we turn inside out that you can see the line through the brain that becomes the left and the right hemispheres of the brain. We become the left and the right leg, the left and the right arm, the left and the right lung. So we become who we are from a single cell. So he talks about, all of the anatomy that we learn, which, I'm not saying that it's not important. I think that it is important to explore all of that, but it's just as important to then, after exploring all of that, come to the realization that none of that matters. I know that can be a really hard thing to say. Also, we are more than that. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that when a student asks me, when I see that effervescent energy of the student who has completed the initial teacher training, and I see the pregnant energy of the teacher who has not yet begun, We are constantly, throughout our entire career as Pilates professionals, dancing with those two energies, because every time we learn something and we get to the end of that learning and we feel like we've overcome such a hurdle of not understanding or of not comprehending or of misunderstanding, and somebody confirms something for us and we walk away with that information, we put it in our toolkit, but then we learn something else, and sometimes it reaffirms what it is that we've already learned. But down the track, I can guarantee when we continue learning for years and years and years and years, eventually we get to the point, and we only get there because we're ready. We only get there because we've got all these tiny little bits of information in our toolkit. Then we are ready to learn the expansiveness of what it is that we simply don't know. And that what we simply don't know, the point is that we don't have to know everything. We don't have to understand why, the person's disc bulge. All we need to do is alleviate the stress that they're experiencing in the body. That's all my job is when I go into the studio now. So I can tell you, I've learned so much. I'm like, over my nearly 20 years of teaching, I hold an encyclopedia of knowledge and of experience of seeing so many bodies move in my toolkit. And that has what's gotten me to the point that now I actually offer less to my clients than what I used to. So I used to spend a lot of time, and I see this happening all the time with brand new students. It's almost like they're trying to fix all of the issues on that very first session, or they're trying to fix all of the issues in the first 6 sessions. It's not going to happen, and it's not our job anyway. Our job is actually very, very simple. We are creating an open space for people to come into the studio and feel supported, safe, loved, and part of a community. That's what it is that we are creating. When they leave the studio, we want them to feel less stressed out. We want them to feel like somebody has listened to them, somebody has empathized with them, they've moved their body, and as they move their body, it allows them to alleviate the tension that they're feeling in their body, potentially from their emotional experiences or their relationship with their outside environment. So we actually create a separate environment for them in the studio to what it is that they're experiencing outside. And then the brain starts to understand or starts to recognize Pilates as a positive experience. We're not trying to fix the disc bulge, because the disc bulge actually does not matter. If we were to, give MRI scans to 100 people, probably more than 50% of those people are going to have a disc bulge or disc degeneration. But less people than what present with the disc bulge or the degeneration. I think actually the statistics are around about, you give 100 people an MRI, 80 of those 100 people have disc degeneration or a disc bulge. But of those 80 people, only 50 people are experiencing pain. And there's no known analytical reason as to why the other 30 people are not experiencing pain. So whatever it is that the person comes into the studio with is irrelevant. What is relevant is that we want to change any negative experience they're having into a positive experience. And we do that not by zooming in. We don't do that by zooming into the disc bulge. We do that by stepping away and observing their entire persona. And even asking many different questions. How much have you been drinking? A lot of water? Have you been what are you nourishing your body with? What medications are you taking? What is your sleep like? if you want to get real personal, have you got any stresses at the moment, relationship issues, work stresses? Have you been out in the sunshine lately? Are you getting a lot of vitamin D and fresh air? I can guarantee that the people that are in pain are not doing all those things. And it's not that then their body is physically dealing with or is physically suffering from not doing those things, but it's that they're not giving those things to their body, and all of those things are signs of them making time for themselves, loving themselves, nourishing themselves, caring for themselves. So if somebody comes in and they're too busy, they're too stressed, they've got too many things on their plate, they don't have enough time, all the negative things, that's why they're in pain. They're not necessarily in pain because of the disc bulge. And I think what happens over the years as a Pilates practitioner, a professional, we are able to put aside those microscopic lessons that we've learned about the body. And it's not that they're not there at all, but it's just that they're not up there on the top shelf anymore, because we understand that there is a bigger picture here. And we understand that just by moving, somebody is normally going to feel good. And it's as simple as saying to somebody or suggesting to somebody, if I get you to do something and it doesn't feel good, then either don't go into that full range or let me know and we can change the tension a little bit. It's as simple as that. So the whole idea of always being in good joint placement, which I definitely teach good joint placement, but you know why I teach it mostly is because it's mindful movement, is because it brings somebody into the moment. It takes away all of their outside stresses, alleviates all their stresses because they cannot think of it anymore, and it brings them right into the very moment of knowing where that joint is in space and then moving through that placement in a direction that does not cause pain. So while we may be improving somebody's posture, in italics always, ultimately what we're doing is teaching somebody to feel themselves. We're teaching them reflection. We're teaching them introspection. We're teaching them inner dialogue. Now, not everybody has inner dialogue. It's thought that 30 to 50% of the population does not have inner dialogue. And where Pilates comes into that, the beauty of Pilates is for somebody who does not have internal dialogue to tell them, that this doesn't feel okay, or, to be able to ask themselves those questions, is we're using the machine to give physical feedback. So somebody who doesn't have internal dialogue to be able to ask themselves those questions and use their intuition and listen to their body, they can use the load of the machines, or if you're doing mat work, they can use the load of their body to be given that physical feedback. And that is something really, really important that comes from Pilates and from working with the body. And knowing that not everybody does have that internal dialogue is very, very important. So people who don't have internal dialogue sometimes don't respond so well to spoken word. So quite often they need you to show them how to do something. They could receive images a little bit better, so if you say your head is a helium balloon, rather than ask them how that feels, or, can they release any tension? You want to give them imagery focus rather than a spoken word focus. But I think that's all for today. I just want to remind us all of, regardless where it is in your learning, I think that we need to be students forever. I don't think that we actually never end up stopping learning, because not even science doesn't even understand. The most brilliant people in the world don't even understand the body and the mind and consciousness, So if we ever get to the point where we feel stagnant in our teaching, what it means is that we are ready to start learning again, or we're ready to jump into something that is pushing us outside of our comfort zone. So I really do encourage you at some stage to start looking away from repertoire, away from Pilates towards whether it's philosophy or spirituality or understanding consciousness. But definitely you will find that if you start looking, that some of the most revered scientists in the world actually retire as philosophers. And that is really the basis of science as well. So I encourage us all to continue the journey of learning, to support students as they themselves are learning. And don't ever feel like you don't know enough. What you know and where you are right now in your learning journey is exactly where you need to be. And certainly don't ever feel either that you are not, that you're not enough for your clients, but also don't ever feel like you're better than somebody else either, because the way that we learn really is omnidirectional and we're all going to focus on different things. And I'd like to think that, by the time we become senior instructors, or by the time we're teaching other people, or by the time we retire, that we have a real deep philosophy of the body in movement and a deep understanding intuitively of how it is that we can help other people. Of course, I've got a new workshop that is now available. If you have a look on the show notes, and in the workshop, I actually talk quite a bit about how is that the brain understands the body in movement and how it is that we can be cueing so that the brain and the body are working as one. Now, this actually is specifically with the left and the right brain in mind. So when we think about the left brain zooming in, we might be zooming in thinking belly button to spine. But when we go zoom out, then there's 4 parts of the body that we want to really be cueing through. And it's very much about, these push and pull forces through the end parts of our body. And that is when you will experience Pilates as a whole body exercise, Pilates as a whole body experience, but it's also when you will start to be able to instinctively reflect on how Pilates plays such a role in both your physical and your emotional state. So I really encourage you to sign up for the workshop, because I think that the way that we communicate is absolutely key for our clients to be able to, what I call, experience the magic of Pilates. Thanks again for joining me. I'm Katie Crane, the Pilates professional, and this is the Pilates Lounge podcast.